Hey, what is up, friends and fellow anti-netters? It is I, Scott Shepard here, and today I want to talk about three types of notes. Now, you may have seen from a previous video I had three types of notes called excerpts, observations, and reflections. Now, I've iterated and really evolved it, so there's really three types of notes that I primarily talk about now, and those are excerpts, reformulations, and reflections. The observation notes are essentially what one uses to place on the bib cards. Like whenever someone is reading, you place your literature notes or bibliography notes on a card, and those are usually observations. So I don't really use those, the observation term, for main cards anymore. However, the observations and what I explained in the previous video, they still do exist. However, they're more pertinent for the one-step process of going straight from reading a book to creating a main note. But what I've been really doing lately, and I'm not saying I do this for every single piece of material that I read or extract, but what I've been doing lately is following the Lumen, let's call it the Lumanian process of doing a two-step, where you go from book to bib card, which is a bibliography card, and taking bib notes on it, which are brief, observation notes or key term notes, then converting it to a main card. And so anyway, we're going to talk about the really three types of notes, the primary types of notes on a main card that go into your main box of your anti-net Zettelkasten. Now, here they are. Okay, I'm going to give you an overview. So there's the excerpt note. I created a nice little cute little, pink butterfly to illustrate this type of note. And we're going to walk through each of them, okay? But here's an overview. So you've got an excerpt note, you've got your reformulation note, and you've got your reflection notes, okay? And I put notes because I've got a few examples that I'll maybe walk you through, okay? Let's start first with the excerpt note. Now, an excerpt note is you're essentially pulling out a quote, and I'm going to read through and walk through this with you right now, okay? This one says, as one scientist observes of Luhmann's system, quote, the outcome is the reproduction of complexity by means of selection. That is, the paradoxical reproduction of complexity through a reduction of complexity. And you see that little one? That's like my footnote. And then at the bottom it says Sevellini 27. That's the reference and source from where this quote comes from. Now under this, and Luhmann did this a lot as well, is, and I have cards in my box where I just only include the excerpt, because it's kind of self-explanatory. But what I did in this one, I think it's generally a good practice, though it takes a little bit more time, is that you explain in your own words what that quote actually means. So that's what I did below. You see the little arrow, it says, essentially you simplify a book's contents by extracting its most potent parts by way of, quote, selection. Then, by creating cards with your own thoughts, aka experiences, thus creating knowledge, you file and install that knowledge in the anti-net, thereby creating a complex entity that you can communicate with. So this kind of explains the quote. It's essentially you are basically reducing complexity by extracting, the complex material from a book, and then creating a more complex entity by, installing what you've just essentially extracted and simplified from the book into a complex entity that is the anti-net Zettelkasten, which contains a ton of complex knowledge and materials. So that's what that quote means. That's an excerpt note. It's largely based on an excerpt, a quote, right? Now, let's go to the second type of note. Now, this type of note is a reformulation note. What you're essentially doing is you're reformulating the content, okay, and you're summarizing it in your own words. Okay, so I'm going to show you real quick where this comes from. So this comes from a book by Kahana on page 246 to 7. And the little IR there is something, it's a little Zotero tag that I use. It means inspired reference dot Kahana 246 to 7. Okay, and so I'm going to show you this page of this book, 246 to 7. And by the time this was during a period where I was doing the sacrilegious practice and blasphemy of actually taking marginalia, like writing in the margins of the books that I was reading, instead of, using a bib card and writing your little observations, on a bib card. So don't copy what I did here and start writing in the margins of the books. It's way better to actually use your bibliography cards, which are in here, which have all of the material that you can quickly flip through. So anyways, here's like the section. You can see it says like elaborative rehearsal, and that is repetition alone. These studies found that maintenance rehearsal does in fact produce, enhanced long-term rehearsal. But look at this, it's jammed into a big page and a half of dense kind of academic speak material if you actually read it, And so what you want to do is you want to reformulate all of this crud, right? All this jargon. It's not really crud, but let's just say for the hell of it, it's crud, okay? You take this crud or this crap and you reformulate it into something simple. And that is what this card is. It's a reformulation of that page. So let's read through this card. It says, scientists specializing in human memory identified 2 mechanisms for encoding thoughts which impact one's ability to later recall the thought. The first one is maintenance rehearsal, which is repeating an item or a thought, simply by writing it down, like writing down quotes. You're essentially rehearsing the thought and stamping it into your mind. Okay, then there's elaborative rehearsal, in which you elaborate on an item and write about its meaning using your own words. Okay, and under that it says researchers found that elaborative rehearsal is much stronger than maintenance rehearsal, yet maintenance rehearsal is in fact effective in developing long-term recall. So this is a reformulation of that page, and it's kind of, as you can see, it's kind of like teaching it in a more simplified manner. That is what a reformulation note is. Okay, and Lewin used the term reformulation notes several times actually in his writings about what kind of notes you should take. Now, the last type of note is the reflection notes. Now, reflection notes is essentially notes that talk about not what the concept is, but what it actually means, meaning why it's important, what it means for your theory that you're trying to prove, what it means for the point you're trying to make, what it means for the world, what it means for, in the grand scheme of things. So let's look at this one. It says, the problem with digital Zettels, okay? There's no fixed ID or Vogelzeitl, which is these things, right? There's no chain of continuous thought, And so this is what I'm reflecting on writing about. I say, the problem with digital Zettelkasten structures of leaves linked together by vines. So what I'm making a point on is that, like, instead of it actually being a tree, with linked leaves and stems of thought that come one after another, a digital Zettelkasten is just like a pile of leaves with, a bunch of vines that link together various leaves and disparate parts and, completely remote areas. It's just like if you've seen those bubble graphs and connecting little circles on Obsidian, like the software, it's like that's what a digital Zettelkasten is. And so, the structure of leaves linked together by vines, pile of leaves, centers on the fact that this does not mirror the reality of human memory as observed by scientists. You see, one of the oldest and still reigning theoretical accounts of human memory, specifically how one learns and recalls information, is the concept of associative chaining. Associative chaining is like, A, B, C, D, kind of like the linked together chain of thought that comes from an actual, real anti-net Zettelkasten with that numeric alpha address, in the top right, and the tree structure, like those slashes that allows you to branch down. So that's the point in reflection that I'm trying to make. So that's an example of a reflection note. Okay, here's another example of a reflection note. And this one says, you can see reflection notes are kind of like almost like a paragraph that you would put in a book or text, right? So it says, although Luhmann himself held that one can place almost everything in it, and he's referring to his, anti-net Zettelkasten, so long as it can be noted down, I hold a closer view to that of which several knowledge scientists assert, and that is the view that an anti-net is primarily a useful tool for writers who do much reading, thinking, and processing of ideas, both short-term and long-term. I'd say I'm 80% in the anti-net is for writers who do a lot of reading and research, like nonfiction writers, yet the system is a ruminant for your thoughts. So really the view is potentially limiting. I'm saying the view is potentially limiting that it's only for writers. And I don't think it's only for writers. I think anyone who wants to ruminate on thoughts, and that's what I get into the next card. So anyone working on or trying to solve mathematical equations or constructing proofs which require rumination over months or years would most certainly find value in an anti-net. Richard Feynman and many physicists would find their success watered down if it were not for their analog devices as a form of short-term thought development and long-term rumination. So this is, me again reflecting and, being inspired by something and reflecting and creating a note that way. So that's what a reflection note is. Anyway, that is a brief overview of the three types of really primary notes that you will be taking in your main box of your anti-net Zettelkasten. Hope this made sense, and hope this clarified some of the differing terms, especially between, someone was asking, between reformulation note and reflection note. So hopefully this clarifies things, and yeah, if you liked this video, please subscribe. I'm trying to make it to 1,000 subscribers, and like and comment and share your thoughts. Peace and love, and also check the description for other links. Goodbye now.